Welcome back to The Sweet Spot. This interview is one of my faves because Jude Charles has an amazing storytelling way of how entrepreneurs can tell their stories. He's produced stories for Google, Steve Harvey, and dozens of visionary CEOs. He is the author of Dramatic Demonstration, a book that provides so much value, and I highly recommend that every business owner should read. His mission is to lead and empower entrepreneurs to have relentless, unwavering courage. And you're about to hear how he does just that. If you enjoy this episode as much as I do, go ahead and tag us both on Instagram. We'll make sure to share your comments on our channels. Enjoy the episode. I'm Barb Davids, and I'm here to help you get more website traffic and leads with simple, actionable SEO and content strategies. In each episode, I share tips and tactics and talk with other business owners who help us grow both in our business and in life. I'm so glad you're here. Let's go. Welcome back to The Sweet Spot. Jude, thanks for joining me. How are you?
I am doing great, Barb. Thank you for having me on the show. I'm really looking forward to the conversation.
Me too. So let me start with this. Since we're talking in the sweet spot, small business sweet spot, what is your sweet spot? Who do you help and how?
My sweet spot is working with entrepreneurs who are at a point in their business where they're looking to tell their story in a powerful way. What that means is that they are either rebranding themselves, so rebranding their business, or possibly just looking to reinvent themselves. They've been doing what they've been doing for a very long time, and now they want to show the world and show their clients who they really are, not just the thing that they do, but like who they really are as a person, as a leader. That is my sweet spot. I have been working with entrepreneurs for the last 18 years, helping them tell their stories in that way. That's how we met. I worked with a client named Luann Nigera, who I helped produce a docu-series on her business and her podcast that she's been running for the last 8 years. But that's my sweet spot. Entrepreneurs who are passion driven, purpose driven, and want to tell their story in a powerful way.
I love that. That's who the listeners are, and that's who I am. So this is a perfect match. So
Awesome.
maybe too, we'll do a kind of a working session almost. I know we talked a little bit before about a certain product that I purchased of yours that I think is helpful for people.
Yeah.
And then also maybe we could, because I'm considering doing this for my own business, maybe we can do a quick little like high level what someone might be able to expect when they work with you, because I'm going to be asking the same questions. So we can do that after some of this other stuff.
Yeah.
So, okay, great. So we were going to talk about how marketing is more than your portfolio, how to create a marketing campaign that attracts your ideal client without showing your final work. Can you tell me what that means?
Yeah. So in the last 5 years, I've worked with a lot of interior designers who, when you go to look at their Instagram page, most interior designers, you'll see their portfolio. They'll see the final pictures, the final work. But the final work only tells 10% of the story. What did it take to get there? Right? In my line of work, I'm a filmmaker and I do video production. Often you'll see video producers will only show the final look. As a matter of fact, a couple of days ago, I got an email from an editor who's looking to get more work, and all he sent me was his reel. And his reel is made up of work that he's done for other clients. But I have no idea how he works. I have no idea what his editing style is like. I have no idea what the client wanted and what he ended up creating. All I saw was the final finished product. And to me, your marketing is more than your portfolio. That means bring me behind the scenes of what it meant for you to put on this project. Bring me into a very specific moment in time where there was a challenge working on this project and how you overcame it, right? When I worked with Luann, we worked together for about a year in doing that docuseries, the first initial docuseries that we did. And there would be times where Luann would reach out to me through Voxer and she would be like, why am I doing this again? Like, this feels like a lot of work. I'm putting myself out there in a vulnerable way. Why am I doing this?
Yeah.
And I would have to talk her off the ledge of like quitting on the project because ultimately the kind of work that I do, it pulls a lot out of you. It brings you into a really vulnerable space because I'm not just looking to talk about the thing that you do. I'm looking to talk about who you are as a person, whether or not you're a husband or a wife, whether or not you're a parent, how you lead your team. I'm looking to talk about all these things that help influence how you show up as a leader. And so even that small story that I just told of Luann tells you something a little bit different. That part of what I do is not just we're going to create a documentary. Part of what I do is coaching, right? I'm helping walk you through this. I'm guiding you through this process. And I think to me, that is why it's so important to go beyond your portfolio. How do you explain and talk about what you do? I'll give you one more example. And I think this example helps explain what I believe is there's a functional problem that you solve in business, but there's also a fundamental one. It works with a builder. He builds homes. Him and his wife are in the business together. So he does the building, his wife does the design. And when I went to go film with them, the husband wasn't ready to film. He was extremely nervous about being on camera. Now, Barb, I know when someone's nervous about being on camera, I cannot put them on camera because it's going to look like they're nervous about being on camera.
Yeah.
So I interviewed his wife, and then I said to him, "Hey, why don't you just take me around to some of your projects that you've been working on?" We went to look at three different projects, three different homes that he's building, and we finally get to lunch, and we're sitting down having lunch one on one, and he finally reveals to me that he hasn't been able to sleep last night. He's really nervous about doing this interview. And I said to him, I don't have an issue understanding you, right? It's because of his accent. He's worried that he comes from Brazil. He's been in the States 20 years, but he still has an accent. And I'm like, I don't have an issue understanding what you're saying. It's like, yeah, I know, but I still worry about it. And then 5 minutes later, he stops eating. He looks at me. He said, to be honest with you, I'm worried about embarrassing my wife and kids.
Hmm.
And I was a bit taken aback. And I was like, wow, that's really deep. And I get it. You are afraid of getting on camera. You're going to sound silly. Maybe you don't have the perfect sentence to put together. But I was like, what if you're embarrassing your wife and kids by not showing up? What if your wife has so much confidence in you and she's just waiting for you to have it? Well, Barb, we ended up doing his interview the next day. And he told me after the interview, it was my words to him was the whipping that he needed. And what he meant by that is it helped change his perspective, right?
Yeah.
Now, the fundamental problem that I solve is helping people tell their story. That's just, if they're looking to grow their business, they're looking to put themselves out there more and gain more notoriety for what they're doing, credibility for what they're doing. That's the functional problem. The fundamental problem, though, is emotional. And what he needed in that moment was the courage and confidence to show up,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
That is why I believe your marketing is more than your portfolio because you need to come from a different place. When clients are thinking about why should I work with you versus any and every other option available to me, that question really boils down to why you, and that why you is more than just your portfolio. You have to dig deeper than that.
And how do you suggest people do that?
Yeah, you start with core values. Your core values define who you are, even when you're not working. Part of what I do is I go really deep in working with my clients. One of my core values is depth versus width. And when I look at that core value, it's not just about the word and maybe having a statement that says, oh, we believe in XYZ. It's about the story that helps illustrate that core value. The two stories I just told you about Luann and the builder shows that again, I'm not just showing up to film something. I'm showing up and I'm telling you a story about, the builder who had an issue with being on camera, right?
Mhm.
And so you have to think about how do you want people to feel when they work with you? What is the experience going to be like? Who are you when you're not working,
Mhm.
right? Who
Right.
what hobbies do you have, right? And then I think the third is just why are you doing the work that you're doing? You could be doing anything else. Why this?
Mhm.
What is it that makes this so important to you? I have always loved storytelling. I started as a kid writing 100-page books. When I was 8 years old, I was writing 100-page books about what I thought my future life could look like.
Oh, wow.
And that transformed into in high school, I realized, oh, I could take what I was writing and possibly turn that into a film. Now, the work that I do today is documentaries, and I realized over time what I don't like is actually doing short films or fictitious films. I love doing real stories. But again, my passion started at a very early age, and I continued from there. So you have to ask yourself those three questions of who are you when you're not working? Why are you doing this specific work? Um, and then ultimately, what are the stories that help illustrate the core values behind what you really have?
Okay.
That's the way to start that and to go about that.
Okay. And I think when I was looking at the samples that you had and the films that you've worked on, the documentary series, it was different. And it was done in such a way that from scene to scene to scene, it didn't feel cut. It didn't feel like disjointed. It was like it just naturally flowed into the next thing. And it was just very well done. So I think, how would you describe your style? If somebody were like, okay, well, it's documentary series, but in like words, how would you describe it?
I am a fly on the wall. In us working together, there's a session that I do, a consulting session that I do called road mapping. And in road mapping is where you're going to share your core values with me. You're going to share with me who you are and the stories that you have and even how you were raised and what you believe in. But then I become a fly on the wall and I'm asking myself this one question. Is it true? Everything that you told me in road mapping when we sat together for 3 hours or 6 hours and we talked about who you are, is it true? And when I get to the location to film with my client, I am not directing them. I'm not saying, hey, you got to do this and do that. I'm saying, do what you normally do. I'm going to capture it as is. Because in the same way that I'm going to capture it, that's the way that people are going to experience it and see it. And so I'm literally just a fly on the wall. I'm walking around with you. I'm seeing what your day to day life looks like in order for others to see and experience that too. Because what this does, this documentary or documentary series, allows other people to get to meet you before they ever meet you.
Mm.
And again, they don't meet you because they are, of course, they might be interested in the thing that you do, right? Like,
Mhm.
Barb, you are a digital marketing coach. They might be interested in that, but they also want to learn more about who you are. Like, why should I work with Barb, who's a digital marketing coach, versus another person,
Mhm.
right? Who might have the same title. And so the work that I do when I am filming me or my team, I am filming real life as it's happening. This is not a reality show. It is just real life. It's a real documentary showing behind the scenes of this entrepreneur. To me, I call it a dramatic demonstration of proof.
Mm.
And you prove everything that you say, everything that you put out on Instagram, or everything that you have on your website. Can you prove that is true in a in a dramatic demonstration? And so that is how I describe it in the work that I do.
Okay. Now, what if someone like just sits behind a desk all day?
I worked with a copywriter named Stefan Georgi.
Okay.
And Stefan, if you think of copywriting, it is possibly the most boring thing that you can imagine, right? It is just writing words. It's literally what you
Mhm.
said. You're sitting behind a computer at a desk writing words.
Mhm.
Well, if you look at the beginning of Stefan's docu series, the first 60 seconds, I am showing you see his daughter. No, sorry. In the first 60 seconds, you see Stefan playing the guitar. And
Mm.
then you hear his daughter come in and she is crying at the top of her lungs, right? But how he responds to that illustrates how he responds to the clients that he works with or the clients that he coaches, because he's also a coach, a copywriting coach.
Mm.
Now, we do show him sitting behind a computer and writing words, but I start with that because what matters to him being a copywriter is who he is as a human being, as a father, as a husband, how he views empowering other people, because he mentions in the beginning how the same way that he empowers his daughter is the same way he thinks about empowering his clients. There are ways to make it interesting because although, yes, you sit behind a computer all day long, there are other things that happen in your life that allows us to show a three-dimensional view of who you really are. And like I mentioned, I do show Stefan sitting behind a computer, but even then, I'm showing the exciting moments. Like there's a moment he gets really alive as he's writing the copy, and he's trying to explain exactly the copy that he's writing. And I asked him, "Why are you so excited right now? What is it about you writing copy that gets you jazzed up?" And he didn't have an answer initially. He said, I think his exact words was, "You know what? I really don't know, but we can explore that." That we can explore that. My whole goal is to get you into the mind of the entrepreneur. And although, yes, it can feel boring, there are moments in your life that can feel boring. There are also other moments that are very interesting that help influence you sitting behind that computer. And those are the things that I look to pull out. Life is interesting. Every part of life is interesting. What makes it interesting is whether or not you're willing to be open and vulnerable. And vulnerability, I want to break this down because vulnerability is not what people may think it is. It's the thing that you show that's your weakness or something that maybe is a very emotional moment that made you sad. That's not vulnerability. Vulnerability, there's strength in vulnerability. There's being vulnerable about the lessons that you've learned over time in your life, being vulnerable about your strengths, being vulnerable to tell people that, hey, I'm really good at this, and being unapologetic about that. That comes from a vulnerable place because for some people that can come off as arrogant or braggadocious, but no, you're being vulnerable about who you really are, the strengths that you have, and then being vulnerable about the stories, the moments in time that have happened to you. And again, the lesson that came from that moment in time. A story is about a very specific moment in time, and then the lesson that you learned in that moment in time. That lesson is obviously the thing that you want the person to walk away with. But the story, even if you're sitting behind a desk, there's a story there. I'll give you one more story, and this is what I mean by like it. This is how the story makes it much more interesting. I actually did a road mapping session last week, and at the end of my road mapping sessions, I like to ask questions, really figure out, okay, did they get what they were looking for in the 3 hours that we sat together? And the client, she said to me, after this strategy session, I feel stronger. Well, Barb, I've never heard that before. You feel stronger. Okay, what does that mean? Tell me more about that. And she was like, the time that it took to even prepare for this session, because there was a little bit of homework that I provide, and she was like, the time that it took, it really made me sit and think. And then I actually come to the session, and we're really figuring out like these things the questions you're asking me. It's just like after this, my mind just feels so much clearer and I feel stronger. I feel more prepared to be a better leader after sitting in this session. And she was like, maybe stronger is not the right word, but maybe I do have more courage. I have more courage to fully show up because now I really get it. It happened by us sitting 3 hours through Zoom. If I were to film that and you're just sitting there watching us, sure. But now I have the story to tell about after the session. She feels stronger. And what does that mean? Right?
Yeah.
The lesson that I walked away from with that, just asking questions at the end, is that sometimes the thing you think that person needs, the problem that you think you're solving is not the problem that is not the real problem that you're solving for them. And unless I asked the question, I wouldn't know. Unless I said, tell me more about that, I wouldn't know. And so that's why it's always important to go a little bit deeper. But it reminds me of my core value, depth versus width. Right. And so yes, you could be sitting behind a computer or you could be doing something that feels boring. But there's so much that goes on in that quote unquote boring moment that makes that moment a little bit more interesting. And if you take the time to think through it, to think through what's the story here? What's this moment in time? What am I learning in this moment in time? That's what makes it interesting.
Fascinating insights. I love that. Let's go into how to pull those stories out because I think that is a probably good segue to that.
Yeah.
As I was learning more about you and went to your website and saw you had, because I was thinking about, okay, well, how do I find stories when I can't remember crap, So it's like, what am I going to do? So, but then all of a sudden I saw on your website like this story prompt journal thing, which we're going to go through here. And it just was delivered in such a different way that it really made me think and it helped prompt me. I mean, there's a lot of prompts in there and the way that it's done isn't typical, which is really what I like. Like I cannot stand doing the same thing every day or like doing things. I'm always trying to find different ways to do things with marketing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought this was just a brilliant way to do it. So we're going to pull it up on the screen. So for those who are listening, we'll be descriptive about what we're going through. And if you're watching the video, you're going to see I'm going to screen share. So why don't you, while I pull it up, talk about what it is and what prompted you to create it?
Yeah, so years ago, I personally just wanted to get better at storytelling. And I
Okay.
came up with an idea that if I am going to get better at storytelling, I need to be writing down the stories that are happening in the mundane moments of life, right? And so I would spend every day about 5 to 10 minutes just writing down what happened today. Just anything random. Like today, I will probably write about sitting down with Barb on the podcast. And I would think through, okay, in that thing happening today, just jotting down quick notes, right? So, like one of the stories I have in my story bank from back then, I know there's like one story in 2019, Uber driver by day, musician by night. That's the title. So I'll give it a title just so I can easily remember it.
Okay.
And then I'll jot down notes and then I'll think about what is the lesson that I possibly learned in this moment. That started years ago. And then in my road mapping sessions, I would give my clients their own story bank because we've spent 3 to 6 hours together and they're telling me all these different stories. One of the things I know my clients aren't doing is collecting those stories,
Mm-hmm.
but I need to collect them so I can keep track of them for the docuseries that we'll do together. But then I noticed my clients were taking that story bank, which is a part of a full roadmap, multi-page roadmap, but they would take that story bank and hand it to their team. And I was like, oh, this is something valuable here. Like they see value in it. And so that's why I created the Story Bank Journal, which is digital and physical. But digital that we're looking at right now, it's a Notion template. And it's one place for you to, there's the vault. So as Barbara is scrolling down, we see the daily Story Bank vault. So that's the one place that I mentioned. You just jot down stories every day. But then go back to the top, and there are the story prompts. So story prompts has 30 as of right now. There are 30, but there will be more added to it. And in the story prompts, you may not you may sit and think about what happened today and maybe nothing interesting happened today. You're like your mind is drawing a blank. Well, these story prompts are there to help you get started. One of the story prompts is how did you get started in your business or career? Another one is what moment go back to the prompts again. So what moment comes to mind when you hear this phrase? That one, if you click on that one, I think the phrase that I use in there is, yeah, I'm proud of you. You did it. So was there a person who you wish would say this to you? Oftentimes I realize with entrepreneurs, something that motivates them is that person that they wish was still alive to encourage them, right? They want to make that person proud. Or has someone already said this to you? So again, the prompts are to get your mind going
Mm-hmm.
and to make you think of how did you feel in that moment. There are over 30 prompts there, and all of them, they're really random. They're not
Yeah.
like specific to business, but
Seinfeld moments.
right, right. This is funny because I actually had a Seinfeld moment. I went to Atlanta this past weekend, and it was a flight. I had an early morning flight Friday at 5:30 in the morning, and there was this lady that was sitting next to me who kept yawning out loud and wouldn't cover her mouth. And it's one of those Seinfeld moments. So in here I have those little everyday annoyances that you encounter. It might be the slow walker, it might be the person yawning, right? Like
Yeah.
again, it gets your mind going, but what you want to happen as you get your mind going is okay, how can I turn this into a lesson that I'm teaching to someone else? Right?
Mm-hmm.
That is the Story Bank Journal. It is there to help you really transform and become a storyteller. We've all heard the idea that we need to be telling more stories.
Mm-hmm.
This helps you actually execute on it.
Yeah.
Barb, I have a question for you because I noticed you have quite a few stories. You've been using it for a while.
Yep.
How
Thank
have
you.
you been able to use this for yourself? Because you mentioned going to the website, you saw that this was a resource and you're like, yeah, this is a different way to do this.
Mm-hmm.
I think you've had it for at least 2 months now. How have you been
Mm-hmm.
able to use it in 2 months?
So I have to get back to it. The past month I've been moving around, so I haven't really dived into it. I started using it very heavily in the very beginning, and I came away with an actual story to use in my marketing, and I used it in a podcast episode where I'm 99% confident to say I would not have thought of using that until I hit this to bring it out of me. Because it never this helped me put that together. I never saw the story in what I did. And basically I went in here and I was thinking about, it's a TikTok beauty buy. So I went through and I thought, I bought this. So I bought this. I don't have it with me, but because I used to keep it with me just for that purpose, because it's like a tangible piece. I went on TikTok, not for very much, for very long, and there was this beauty thing that like I don't like my under bag eyes or whatever. So I'm thinking, okay, this lady puts on this stuff right here, and I literally saw it transform right there on the screen. Now I know marketing, right? You would think that I would be like, hey, that's a ploy, right? But she literally did it right there. So I thought, well, I could spend $40 and see what would happen. So I spent
Right.
$40 against my better judgment, got the product, put it on. I don't want to swear. I swear though, like I put it on there and I walked away to go do something to come back, and I only did it on one eye to see, and it took the lines away. I thought, oh my God, this stuff is great. So I put it on my other eye and I put on my makeup and I went around through my day. Later that day, I looked in the mirror and there were like little tiny blotches all over underneath my eye because it had hardened and cracked underneath my
Oh,
makeup.
wow.
So it
Wow.
was just one of those temporary things. And it never occurred to me, but it was temporary. So it only works for like a few seconds. And if you don't move. So it kind of related to marketing in that there is no silver bullet. Like there is
Yeah.
no way that like there's one-off things that maybe will work with marketing and you might get a lot of traffic, or there's like a quick win or something like that. But there's nothing out there typically for most people with what they sell that all of a sudden you do this one marketing thing and boom, you're going to get a whole bunch of traffic.
Yeah.
So, because everybody's always looking for the silver bullet in marketing and life, whatever. So that's what I related it to. So I put it in here, and that's
That's a
what I
really good
ended up.
story. Yep.
Yeah, I ended up doing that. And then I didn't do the hook and the desire piece of it because I had already figured out like the story behind it once I put these things down. So
Yeah.
it
So
was
what
very
so what
helpful.
so what Barb is talking about is and when you go to open up the story and you begin to work on it, you just jot down a random story. There are three different phases. The first phase is to just write down the story really quickly. It's not meant to take long. Write down the story. But then in phase two, you know you're going to get ready to use the story somehow. That's where you take a little bit longer to really flesh out the story. And I've outlined it where you will think about what's the hook to the story. You think about what are the desires or obstacles in your way of getting what you want. And then you go deeper in talking about what you were thinking, feeling, and seeing. Now, as Barb was telling the story, which is interesting, although she didn't fill this out, you can see what she was thinking, feeling, and seeing. You know what she's thinking by she doesn't like the bags under her eyes. You know what she was feeling after realizing there's these little dots, and it's like, oh, it only lasts for a few seconds, right? But even that, it's you're seeing, even if you're only listening to the audio version of this podcast, you're seeing what Barb was talking about. And that is the point of like taking the time to work on your stories is because one thing is we're all natural storytellers. We tell stories every single day. But then there's some stories we discount and we say, "Oh, well, that story isn't important." Like, why would Barb tell a story about a random product that she bought off of TikTok? There's no reason to, unless she ties the lesson, no silver bullet, to her business, which is that you're absolutely right. In business, people are always looking for a silver bullet, the quick fix, the thing that will help them blow up their business. And it's just like the marketing is going to take a little bit of time. I'm not saying it's going to take a month, 2 years, but it's going to take some time. We need to be patient with this. I know what I'm doing. There's no silver bullet. And now you have a story to tell, not only on your podcast, but even when you're working one on one with a client and they may be stressed out and thinking about, oh, sales aren't coming in right now. And it's like, okay, we're going to fix these holes. But I just want to remind you, there's no silver bullet,
Mhm.
right? We can
Yeah.
patch up things and we can try to do the quick trend, or we can build this business the right way and put things in place that's actually going to help you and fortify your business. And so, yeah, that's the point of the story bank journal. It's you sit down, you write the stories, and then you're able to now communicate in a different way that allows that person to understand what you mean. When you say no silver bullet, Barb, and I say no silver bullet,
Mhm.
we're probably talking two different languages. But when you begin to tell me a story about a very specific moment in time, something that happened to you, what that may do is two things. One, it might trigger another story in my mind about something I purchased and thought it would be a silver bullet, or it will allow me to understand, oh, that's what she means by no silver bullet. Like, okay, I get it. We're now communicating. We're now having a conversation where we understand each other. So I love that you walked us through that and you actually got a chance to use it. One more question for you though.
Okay.
You, if you hadn't purchased it, if you hadn't used it, and I'm going to tell you why I'm asking this question. It's going to go into why I think it's so critical to continuously get client testimonials. But if you hadn't used the Story Bank Journal, what route would you be taking to find these stories? Like what would happen if you hadn't found the Story Bank Journal?
It would have taken me so much longer to get to that point, I think. I think eventually I probably would have made it, but this took the struggle out of it for sure.
Mhm.
Like thinking about trying to think about stories is agonizing to me because I can't remember and I don't want to just sit and think and like it's just painful. But this actually made it almost fun because it's done in a different way visually. That was a big piece of it for me. Like doing the Notion is something different. And just the idea of having the prompts and walking through, okay, here's some things you can think about on a daily basis. It made it really simple and not painful.
A question I love to ask when I'm doing client testimonies for my clients, um, for example, if I were to do it for someone I'm interviewing that worked with you, Barb, it would be, have you considered what life would be like if you hadn't worked with Barb?
Mm.
And that question usually brings up an emotional or animated response. I have had it before where a person cried, but I've also had it. I interviewed a client for an interior design client of mine that when I asked the question, her eyes were almost popping out of her face. She was like, I don't want to imagine that because it was too stressful to find the right interior designer. And
Yeah,
now that I found her, I can't let her go.
yeah.
Right. What that communicates is that there's something so much more deeper than just whether it's the product on my side with Storybank Journal or the service working with an interior designer. There's something so much deeper than that, that it's not just about interior design. This person is the only person I could work with, right?
Hmm.
And so it's important for us to continuously ask our clients questions in order to better understand that and to better understand what's valuable to them. So there's the value that you bring, there's the value that they get, and then there's the value that others get. And you want to ask your clients questions in order to get to that deep level of like understanding what's important to them. Because 9 times out of 10, what's important to them might be important to another person, and you're not communicating that. You're not telling stories around that to help them understand what makes you different. One thing that I know that makes me different is that I bring clarity, confidence, and courage. And so I'm constantly looking for stories that I can help communicate. Are we going to do a video together? Are we going to tell your story? Absolutely. But what's ultimately going to come out of this is that you're going to be so much clearer about what you do. You're going to have the confidence to show up in a different way and the courage to go after big opportunities that you probably were downplaying and say, oh, I'm not ready for that yet.
Hmm.
I know how to communicate that now because I ask questions. The agony that you talked about having from sitting down to think about stories is now a way I can communicate with the Story Bank Journal. Take the agony out of it, take the pain out of it, that allows you to get to the story much faster so that you have more time to do other things in your business, right? Like it's important to get to that level of clarity so you can communicate from that level of clarity in working with others.
I might actually be able to use the same angle for my marketing because nobody wants to do SEO and content marketing.
Exactly. Exactly.
It's
And
painful.
it is painful. And you
Yeah.
think about you and what that does is when you think about that, it's painful. Okay, what let me work backwards of thinking. The lesson is it's painful and I know you don't want to do it. There's agony in it. What's the story I could tell them that shows them that, hey, when we walk through this, I'm gonna make it a little bit easier for you than the way that you're thinking about doing this. Like another story that I tell or I use in the onboarding of my road mapping strategy sessions, which I mentioned, they're 3 to 6 hours, they're long. You get really vulnerable. Some people have said it feels like a therapy session. And so I tell this story of my 30th birthday. I got surprised by my girlfriend at the time with 2 tickets to go skydiving. Now, Barb, 4 years leading up to this, I had been talking about going skydiving, but there's a reason I had only just been talking about it. We get to the skydiving center, and I walk up to the counter, and the person at the counter hands us 5 pages of paperwork that over and over, when you look at every page, it just reminds you, you might die. And so walking to the plane, going up in the sky with the door wide open on the plane, strapping up to get ready to jump out this plane, all of it was a blur. All I remember is the instructor who was attached to me, it was a tandem jump, him asking me, "Are you ready?" Tapped me on my shoulder and pushed me out the plane.
Oh gosh.
Now, ultimately, I
My
was
hands are
scared out
sweaty
of my
thinking
mind.
about it.
Exactly. Ultimately, I was scared out of my mind, but it was one of the best experiences I've ever had. All of the anxiety that I had building up to it went away when I'm looking at the skyline and I'm looking at this was in Miami, a city I've never really looked at from up above, right? From 10,000 feet in the air. Had one of the best experiences in my life. And obviously, because I'm sitting here talking with you, I landed on 2 feet, right? I use
Yeah.
that story in onboarding, and the way that I end it is to say that it's going to feel really scary, just like it felt scary for me jumping out of an airplane. I'm going to ask you questions you probably have never been asked before, but I want you to trust that you're going to land on 2 feet and you're going to have one of the best experiences that you've ever had.
I
I could
love
tell
that.
you that. I could
Hmm.
tell you that. I could say a statement. You're going to have one of the best experiences you ever had.
Hmm.
Or I can think of the story that helps illustrate that.
Hmm.
And so even as you're thinking of like, yeah, I can use the same angle with pain and agony, you absolutely can. What is the story that you attach to that that
Hmm.
helps this person see for themselves? I'm never looking to convince somebody to work with me because I think they should work with me. I'm looking at guiding them to making the right decision for themselves. And if I can tell them stories to help them decide, oh, you know what? That is somebody I want to work with. That is somebody I think that can help me get to the finish line or get to the goal that I'm looking to accomplish.
Hmm.
Then I've done my job. And if they say no, or I decide they're not the right fit, then that's amazing too, because I like to work with people that we're the right fit. Right. And so I agree with you. Absolutely. It is, I think, even in the moments where we're thinking about what's the idea I want to convey here, you go to your story bank journal and maybe you start with that because there's a place to put lesson. You start with a lesson. What's the idea I want to convey? And then work backwards to, okay, what's a moment in time that illustrates that idea? Right. And
Hmm.
that is the entire point of the story bank journal.
Yep. Perfect. I love it. All right. So, from all of that, what would you say is one takeaway that everybody you hope they walk away with?
Yes. So the easiest thing you can do to get started with a story bank
Is go buy
is
the
to
journal.
go by the journal. Obviously, go by the journal. But even when you sit down to think about the stories, and let's just say you don't go to the prompts first, you have a phone that has plenty of pictures and videos in it from moments in time. What I like to do sometimes is I just scroll back to maybe 2022, 2021, and I think about if I'm looking at this picture, what happened in that moment and start from there. We all have stories. We all have moments in life that have happened to us, good and bad. And there are strong lessons in there. But start with just scrolling through your phone, looking at memories. What happened in that moment? And tell me about it.
That is a great way to get started. My mind is blown with that advice. That is really awesome. I love it. All right. And if somebody wants to start working with you, which I can't imagine why they wouldn't, how can they reach out to you?
Yeah, judecharles.co is my website. I encourage you, highly encourage you to join the newsletter. That's where I talk about more of these ideas and where you can obviously get the Story Bank Journal as well. But judecharles.co, you'll see it the same way that Barbara went in first time, the same way that Barb came to my website and she heard about me, went to my website. You'll see the resources right at the top, and you could either get the Story Bank Journal or the newsletter, the free newsletter. But it is a newsletter that goes really deep into the lessons in the ideas that go beyond just video storytelling. It goes beyond into leadership and how you show up in life.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time. I'm very grateful to have the chance to talk to you, Jude. Thanks.
Thank you for having me, Barb.
All right. And that wraps up this episode. Stay tuned for more episodes to help your business thrive online. We'll see you in the next sweet spot. Cheers. Thank you for sticking around. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you're looking for SEO and content marketing help, you can find all kinds of information at compassdigitalstrategies.com. And if you like the episode, please tell a friend. Cheers.